"You always were the runt of this family," my father said, loud enough for the whole ballroom to hear. The champagne glasses caught the light, and somewhere behind me, I heard a woman stifle a laugh into her napkin. 200 people in the Maritime Club of Newport, and my father had chosen that exact moment, between the toast and the dessert course, to remind every donor, every admiral's wife, every shipping executive he'd ever shaken hands with, that his only daughter was a disappointment. I stood there in a borrowed black dress, holding a glass of water because I don't drink, and I let him do it. He turned to the young man beside him, the one with the easy smile and the expensive watch, and his whole face changed, softened, lit up like a dock at sunrise. "This," he said, putting a hand on the kid's shoulder, "is Spencer, my stepson, 24 years old and already accepted into the Navy's officer pipeline, a natural leader, a born sailor. The future of this family, ladies and gentlemen." The room applauded. My father beamed. Spencer dipped his head with practiced humility, the kind they teach you in the prep schools my father had paid for. Nobody applauded for me. Why would they? As far as that room knew, I was the quiet one who dropped out of contact years ago, who showed up to these galas maybe once a decade, who couldn't hold my father's gaze without flinching. The fat, forgettable one. He didn't say fat out loud that night. He didn't have to. He'd said it enough times when I was 16 that the word had moved into my bones and never paid rent. I'd come because my grandmother asked me to. She was 91 and she'd said, on the phone, in that paper-thin voice of hers, "Come home once before I'm gone, sweetheart. Let them see your face." So I came. I flew in from across the country, rented a car, put on the dress, and walked into a room that had already decided who I was, a long time ago. What none of them knew, what my own father didn't know, was that for the last 6 years I'd been someone else entirely. Let me back up. I grew up in a house on the water in Newport, Rhode Island. The kind of house with a brass barometer in the hall and oil paintings of ships nobody in the family had actually sailed. My father came from old shipping money, the sort that had thinned out over generations but still bought respect at the yacht club. He spent his life chasing the approval of men richer than him, and he expected his children to be trophies he could set on a shelf. My mother died when I was 9, pancreatic cancer, fast and cruel. After she was gone, the house got colder in a way that had nothing to do with the ocean wind. My father remarried when I was 13, a woman named Glenda, who had a son from her previous marriage, and that son was Spencer. From the day they moved in, it was clear which child counted. I was a chubby, anxious girl who stuttered when I was nervous and loved taking things apart to see how they worked. My father saw a defect. Spencer was 3 years younger, golden, athletic, the kind of boy who could charm a teacher into changing a grade. My father saw a legacy. By the time I was 16, I had learned to make myself small. I ate alone in my room. I stopped raising my hand. The one place I felt alive was the garage, where my mother's old laptop sat on a workbench and where I taught myself to write code from library books and free online courses. I built little programs that did nothing important. A script that tracked the tides. A model that predicted where the fog would roll in off Narragansett Bay. My father found my notebooks once and threw them in the recycling bin. "Stop wasting your life on nonsense," he said. "No man wants a woman who'd rather talk to a machine than to him." I left for college on a scholarship he didn't know I'd applied for, and I never really came back. We spoke maybe twice a year, holidays mostly, and even then the conversations were brief and bruising. He'd ask if I'd lost weight. He'd ask if I was seeing anyone. He'd tell me about Spencer's lacrosse trophies, Spencer's sailing medals, Spencer's acceptance here and there. I'd say, "That's great, Dad," and hang up and stare at the wall. What I didn't tell him, because he never asked a single question about my actual life, was that I'd majored in computer engineering and graduated at the top of my class. That I'd been recruited straight out of school by a defense research lab. That for the past 6 years I had been the lead systems architect on a classified autonomous maritime defense program, the kind of thing with a code name and a clearance level and a budget the size of a small nation's GDP. In certain rooms, very quiet rooms, the system I designed had a nickname. The engineers who tested it against live fleet exercises started calling it the Cartographer, because it could map a contested stretch of ocean faster and more completely than any human crew, predicting threats before they surfaced, rerouting unmanned vessels in real time. The Navy loved it. It had saved a destroyer in the Pacific during an incident that never made the news. And the woman who'd built it, who'd led the team, whose name was on the patents that the government had promptly sealed, was the same woman standing in that ballroom in a borrowed dress, being called the runt of the family. I never told my father any of it. Partly because I couldn't. The clearance forbade it. But mostly, if I'm being honest, because I'd stopped believing he deserved to know. So there I was. The applause for Spencer was dying down. My father was steering him around the room, introducing him to the men who mattered. And I was drifting toward the back, toward the doors, toward my rental car and the long drive to the airport and the life I'd built 3,000 miles from this place. That's when the Admiral arrived. I knew who he was the second he walked in, even before the room rearranged itself around him the way crowds do around real power. Admiral Thaddeus Brent, 4 stars, head of the Office of Naval Research. I knew him because I briefed him twice. Once in a SIS-5 beneath a building in Virginia, and once over a secure video link at 2 in the morning when the cartographer flagged something nobody else had caught. My father didn't know him personally, of course, but he knew the uniform. He knew the stars. And I watched my father's entire body orient toward the Admiral like a compass needle, watched him grip Spencer's elbow and start to muscle through the crowd, his face already shaping the words, "This is my stepson, the future of the Navy, you simply must meet him." I tried to leave before it happened. I really did. I was almost at the door. "Excuse me," the Admiral's aide called out, and the whole room went quiet, and I realized with a cold drop in my stomach that the aide was calling to me. "Ma'am?" Admiral Brent would like a word. Every head turned. My father's first. I saw the confusion ripple across his face, the way you'd look if your dog suddenly recited Shakespeare. Why would a 4-star admiral want a word with his disappointment of a daughter? I walked back into the center of the room. My heels were too loud on the marble. The admiral stepped toward me, and he did something that made 200 people inhale at once. He came to attention, and he saluted me. "It's an honor to see you here," he said, his hand snapping down. "I didn't expect to." "I hope you'll forgive an old sailor for making a scene." He smiled. "The real kind, the kind that crinkles. But I've wanted to thank you in person for a long time. The thing you built out there, what you did off the coast of Mindoro, that was the finest piece of engineering I've seen in 40 years of service. There are sailors alive today because of you." The silence in that ballroom was absolute. I could hear the ice settling in someone's glass. My father pushed forward, his face a strange gray color, his hand still locked on Spencer's arm. "Admiral," he said, and his voice cracked on the word, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is my daughter. She works with computers. She's not." He didn't even have an end for the sentence. He'd never bothered to learn enough about my life to finish it. The Admiral looked at my father for a long, level moment. Then he looked back at me, and something in his expression shifted because he'd worked with enough people to read a room, and he could feel the temperature of the one he'd just walked into. "Your daughter," the Admiral said slowly, "is the lead architect of the most advanced maritime defense system this country has ever fielded. The program everyone in my world has been talking about for 3 years. We don't say her project's name in public, but the people who know, know." He paused. "You did know that, didn't you?" My father's mouth opened, closed. I watched 20 years of certainty drain out of his face. And here's the thing I want to say about that moment, because I'd imagined some version of it 1,000 times over the years, lying awake, building the perfect comeback, the perfect cruelty. I'd dreamed of humiliating him the way he'd humiliated me. I'd written whole speeches in my head. But standing there with the Admiral beside me and the whole room holding its breath and my father looking at me like he'd never seen me before, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. And underneath the tired, something I hadn't expected, a kind of grief. Because I finally understood that the man who'd spent my whole life telling me I was nothing had simply never been paying attention. He'd missed all of it, not because I'd hidden it, because he'd never once thought to look. Spencer, to his credit, was the first one to recover, and he surprised me. He let go of my father's arm, stepped forward, and stuck out his hand. "I had no idea," he said, and he sounded genuinely shaken. I've spent 2 years reading everything I can about that program for my application essays. I quoted it in my officer interview. I had no idea it was. He stopped, looked at me, and his voice dropped. It was you the whole time? It was me the whole time, I said. He shook my hand like it meant something. And I realized that Spencer wasn't the villain of my story. He was just a kid who'd been handed a role by the same man who'd handed me mine. The favorite. The heir. He hadn't asked for it any more than I'd asked to be the runt. The Admiral stayed and talked with me for a few minutes, asked about my next project, told me his door was always open. Then he excused himself, worked the room the way admirals do, and the gala slowly remembered how to breathe. People I'd never met drifted over to introduce themselves. A shipping executive who'd ignored me for years suddenly had a great deal to say. I was polite. I didn't gloat. There was nothing to gloat about. They hadn't changed their minds about who deserved respect. They'd just gotten new information about who I was. That's not the same thing, and I knew it. My father didn't come near me for the rest of the night. He stood by the windows with a drink he didn't touch, watching the harbor lights, looking like a man who'd built his whole house on a fault line and only just felt the ground move. It was my grandmother who finally brought us together. She'd been wheeled in late, the way the very old arrive at parties, and she'd watched the whole thing from her chair near the fireplace with sharp eyes that hadn't dimmed at all. When I went to say goodbye to her, she held my hand in both of her cool, papery ones, and she said, "I always knew. Your mother knew too. She used to say you had the kind of mind that builds the future." Then, she looked across the room at my father and her voice got hard. "Go talk to him. Not for him. For you. So you don't carry this any further than you have to." I almost didn't. But she was 91, and she'd asked me to come home, and I understood now that this was the real reason. She'd wanted to see this happen before she died. She'd wanted me to have it. So I walked over to the windows. My father didn't turn around. We stood side by side looking at the boats, the same boats we'd looked at when I was a little girl, before everything went cold. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said finally. It wasn't quite a question. Would you have believed me? He was quiet for a long time. "No," he said. "Probably not." And that somehow was the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. "I spent a long time wanting you to be proud of me," I told him. "I built half of what I built chasing a feeling I was never going to get from you. And then one day I stopped, and that's when the work actually got good. So," I let out a breath that fogged the cold glass. "You don't get to be proud of me now. Not because I want to punish you, but because it isn't yours anymore. I did it without you. I'd have liked to do it with you. You weren't there." He nodded slowly. A tear ran down the side of his nose and he didn't wipe it away, and I think it was the first time in my life I'd ever seen him cry. "I'm sorry," he said. The words came out rusty, like a hinge that hadn't moved in decades. I believed that he was. I just also knew that sorry doesn't run backward through time and rebuild a childhood. Both of those things were true at once, and I'd finally gotten old enough to hold them in the same hand. "I know," I said, and I meant it, and I left it there because that was all I had. I flew home the next morning, back to my apartment, my dog, my quiet life, the work that's still classified, still unglamorous, still mine. My father texts me now every couple of weeks, awkward little messages. A photo of the harbor, a question about my work that he knows I can't answer. I write back, "It's not a relationship exactly. It's more like two people learning a language neither of them speaks well, very late in life. Some days I think we'll get there. Some days I tank. I've stopped needing to know." My grandmother passed away that winter, peacefully in the house on the water. At the funeral, my father stood up and told the room about his daughter. The engineer, the one who builds the future. He got some of the details wrong. He always will. But he stood up, and he said it out loud, in front of everyone, and for once the word he reached for wasn't a knife. It wasn't the apology I'd spent my whole life waiting for. But I've learned that the things we wait our whole lives for almost never arrive in the shape we imagined. They come smaller and later and with the corners worn off. And the strange gift of growing up is learning to recognize them anyway, and to take what's real over what's perfect, and to walk out of the rooms that once made you small, standing up all the way straight. I don't go to the galas anymore. I don't need that room to know my name. But sometimes, when I'm out on the water near my own home, far from Newport, watching the fog come in exactly where my old code said it would, I think about that little girl in the garage with her mother's laptop, building things nobody believed in. And I tell her the thing nobody told her back then. I tell her she was right. I tell her to keep going. And I tell her that one day, the whole room is going to go quiet, and it won't matter at all because she'll already know who she is. For a long time, I thought the cruelest thing my father ever did was call me the runt in that ballroom. I know now it was something quieter. He simply never looked. Every door he slammed on my notebooks, every gala where he steered the Admiral towards Spencer instead of me, all of it traced back to one choice he made and kept making. He decided who I was when I was 9 years old, and he never updated the picture. That's the chain I had to learn to see. His contempt didn't fall out of the sky. It was built brick by brick out of 1,000 small refusals to pay attention. And my silence helped build it too, because for years I waited for him to notice instead of deciding my work was worth doing whether he ever did or not. The night the room went quiet, I didn't win because I'd been cruel back. I won because of 3 things I'd been growing in the dark while nobody was watching. The first was the choice to do honest work and treat the people on my team decently even when no one was clapping for me, because a good name in the rooms that matter is something you build slowly and can't fake. The Admiral saluted the person I'd actually become, not the one I'd performed. The second was the patience to keep learning, to sit in that garage with my mother's old laptop and teach myself one hard thing at a time, until the girl who took machines apart became the woman who designed them. Nobody handed me that. I read my way there. And the third was the plain stubbornness to keep going through years when going felt pointless, when the phone calls bruised and the holidays hollowed me out. I didn't outlast my father's voice because I was special. I outlasted it because I refused to put the work down even on the days I believed every terrible thing he'd ever said. If you take anything from my story, take this. The people who underestimate you are usually just not paying attention, and you cannot make someone look. What you can do is become so undeniably yourself that one day, the looking happens on its own in front of everyone, with no speech required. Be the person who does it right when it's hard and unwatched. Keep teaching yourself the next difficult thing long after school is over. And on the gray mornings when quitting would be the easiest, kindest seeming choice, stay one more day at the workbench. My father missed almost all of it. That's his grief to carry, not mine. I stopped needing his pride the same year my work got good. And those 2 things were not a coincidence. I built my life without him, and I'd have rather built it with him, and both of those can be true. So go build the thing nobody believes in yet. Do it cleanly. Do it smart. Do it stubbornly. The room will go quiet eventually, and by then it won't even matter, because you'll already know exactly who you are.